The sky over Europe darkened in the summer of 1940 as the Battle of Britain approached. With the fall of France, the evacuation at Dunkirk, and the looming threat of invasion, the United Kingdom found itself standing almost alone. In this opening chapter, we set the stage: the geopolitics, the fear, the hope, and the young men and women who would soon decide the fate of nations. Britain had watched with stunned disbelief as Nazi Germany's Blitzkrieg swept through Poland, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France in rapid succession. In just 6 weeks, France's defenses collapsed, and the British Expeditionary Force was evacuated back to these shores. The threat was immediate. Hitler's gaze turned across the Channel. A potentially fatal blow would come not from sea or land, but from above. Within Britain's government and military hierarchy, a sober conversation was underway. If the island nation could not defend its skies, if the Luftwaffe established air superiority over the United Kingdom, then the feared invasion plan, Operation Sea Lion, might become reality. The possibility of defeat, occupation, or worse hung heavy in the air. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding and his command at RAF Fighter Command urged readiness. The British public steeled for the unimaginable. Amid this tension, the British people found rallying cries. On 4th of June 1940, Prime Minister Winston Churchill told Parliament, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender." Then came the dramatic evacuation of Dunkirk. More than 300,000 soldiers brought home across the Channel. Britain had been humbled, scarred, but not defeated. The island still stood, yet standing alone also meant being vulnerable. The Royal Air Force possessed far fewer aircraft than the Germans, and the nation's defenses were stretched thin. The sense of urgency was overwhelming. Britain's survival might depend upon the courage of a few fighter squadrons, the technicians who kept them flying, and the radar operators who tracked the incoming threat. In this episode, we meet the early players: Dowding, Churchill, the engineers, the air crew, and ground staff. We learn how Britain prepared in the weeks before the storm. We examine how a nation braced itself not just for a battle of machines, but for a battle of will. But we also bring the story into the present. In 2025, the Royal Air Force marked the 85th anniversary of the Battle of Britain on 15th of September, a commemoration that reminds us how the events of 1940 still shape the future. According to the RAF, at its height, the UK had only 749 fighter aircraft available, compared to some 2,550 at the disposal of the Luftwaffe. Royal Air Force. The anniversary ceremonies not only honored the past, but looked ahead. Today's pilots fly the Typhoon and F-35, backed by integrated air defense systems far removed from the Hurricanes and Spitfires of 1940. Royal Air Force. The spring of 1940 saw Germany's war machine in full stride. Blitzkrieg tactics penetrated deep, swift, and almost unstoppable. The Maginot Line proved a trap. Allied armies were outmanned, outpaced, and outplanned. The fall of France on 22nd June 1940 left Britain isolated, facing a foe that believed the skies over England would be next. In London, the mood was grim. Defenses were being hastily strengthened, radar systems rushed into position, and fighter commands scrambled to prepare. The home front awakened to the possibility that their island might soon be invaded. Warnings were blared, children were evacuated, and factories were converted for war production. The sense of urgency was clear. This was no longer a distant conflict. It was on Britain's doorstep. The Germans planned to neutralize the RAF, gain air superiority, and then launch Sea Lion, their cross-channel invasion. Every hour that Britain remained aloft in the sky, every pilot who took off in a Hurricane or Spitfire, every staffer who maintained the airfields, became part of that defensive bulwark. Under Dowding's leadership, Fighter Command reorganized. The chain-home radar stations along the south and east coasts of England were integrated into a command and control network that could detect approaching raids. The Observer Corps kept watch from high ground. Fighter squadrons rotating through bases from Kent to Norfolk waited ready. Ground crews, mechanics, armorers, and drivers kept the machines flying around the clock. The British fighter aircraft themselves had been quietly improved. The Supermarine Spitfire and Hawker Hurricane were being built in larger numbers, engines upgraded, tactics revised. But the scale of the challenge remained vast. The Luftwaffe possessed more aircraft, more experience, and a single-minded aim to dominate the skies. Britain had advantages, though home territory, shorter supply lines, a nascent radar network, and, crucially, the will of the people. The war budget soared. Factory production expanded. Women entered munitions and aviation factory jobs. The moral might match the mechanical. In our archival visuals, we see shots of radar huts, fighter squadrons painting camouflage, airfields stern and smoky, ground crews in overalls and machine shops humming with activity. In our voiceover, we pause on the human element, the pilot waiting anxiously for the scramble call, the mechanic who hasn't slept, the group of schoolgirls watching the air raid siren wail. By July 1940, the skies were quiet but uneasy. The German bombing of French ports and shipping convoys across the Channel had begun. The Luftwaffe probed, learned, adjusted. Fighter Command launched sweeps. Anti-aircraft batteries stood ready. Britain held its breath. If the invasion came, it would come soon. British spy networks reported troop movements in German-occupied France. Channel shipping volumes increased. Air defense training intensified. The scene was set. The players in place, the board aligned, yet even then, hope flickered. Factories produced new Hurricanes, Spitfires rolled off the lines, ground crews worked through nights to replenish squadrons. Civilians adjusted to blackout rules, civil defense training simmered. The nation watched the sky with new awareness. In our narration, we follow one young pilot. Let's call him Flight Lieutenant Jones. Just 21, newly assigned to number 92 Squadron. He writes a letter home. "We are ready. The machines are tuned. My hopes are high. Let's hope we're not needed too soon." And then we meet Sergeant Parker, a ground crew mechanic who says, "When I see the Hurricanes take off, I know the country's safe. As long as they're flying, I believe." We show the radar operators in their huts, lines of fighters on the runway as dawn breaks, the silhouette of the Spitfire in the early light. We feel the tension, the anticipation, the dread. Fast forward to 2025. The RAF's article titled "The Battle of Britain, 85 Years of the Past, Still Shaping Our Future" described the anniversary on 15th September and reaffirmed how the RAF's mission of defending the skies remains as relevant today as ever. Royal Air Force. The same article noted the stark contrast. From 749 fighters in 1940 to today's Typhoons and fifth-generation aircraft in integrated air defense systems. One of the commemorations saw the historic flypast of 4 Spitfires, including one flown by astronaut Tim Peake on 19th of September 2025, forming a living link between the past and the present. Spitfires.com. A poignant moment came earlier in March, when the last surviving pilot of the Battle of Britain, John Paddy Hemingway, died aged 105, marking the passing of a direct living link to those events. AP News Plus One. These modern commemorations do more than honor the past. They pose questions. How is air defense now conducted? What lessons from 1940 apply in an era of drones, missiles, and integrated sensor networks? Could Britain face another Battle of Britain in a different form? As the RAF put it, the hope is there will never be another. But if there is, we are better prepared. Royal Air Force, let us pause to meet the human side of this preparation. In July 1940, Pilot Officer Michael Wright of No. 611 Squadron arrived at Tangmere Air Base. At 22, he had trained just 6 months. His brother was serving in the army in France. The Blackburn Works where he had been apprenticed now built Hurricanes. His mother packed sandwiches for him, told him to come back safe, and prayed nightly. In the same month, Corporal Mary Lewis, a member of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAF, stationed at Biggin Hill, logged radar plots late into the night in the underground operations room. Her hands were steady, though her heart raced. She had letters from boys she'd known in childhood who were now pilots scrambling through the dark sky. She couldn't be in the cockpit, but she could help them find the enemy. These are not myths of heroics alone. They are ordinary people faced with extraordinary odds. Young, untested, filled with hope mixed with fear, and we watch them readying for the storm. Even as the skies darkened, Britain's resolve crystallized. Factory workers increased output, convoys kept the lifeline to America and empire alive, and children evacuated to the countryside. The language of "we will defend this island" spread across the nation. Churchill's words echoed in school assemblies and church sermons. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. In the weeks ahead, those words would take on bitter truth. Public morale was tested. Rationing began. Blackout curtains drawn, the expectation of war on the home front assumed. But hope remained. The Roman Catholic and Anglican churches offered prayers. Thousands volunteered in civil defense units, and the RAF controller rooms hummed with readiness. Visuals for the documentary sweep from black and white photos of factory floors, children carrying gas masks, spires of radar masts, to color footage of 2025 flypasts and tribute services. We link past and present. As dusk falls on summer 1940, Britain stands alone, vulnerable yet unbowed, outnumbered yet not defeated. The stage is set. The fighters are ready, the pilots alert, the nation awakened. In the next episode, we will dive into Hitler's gamble, how the Luftwaffe prepared to strike, how Britain's air defense network came into play, and what this meant for the skies above southern England. But before we move on, we reflect on 2025 once again, a flypast of Spitfires, memorial services at Westminster Abbey and across the Commonwealth, the passing of the last of the few, and a renewed awareness that those skies still matter. Because, as history has shown, air superiority can decide not just battles, but the fate of nations. Join us next time for Episode 2, Hitler's Gamble, the story of strategy, preparation, and decision-making behind the greatest air battle the world had yet seen. The summer of 1940 carried a silence that felt unnatural. Across the ruined fields of northern France, the smoke of retreat still clung to the hedgerows like a ghost that refused to leave. Just weeks earlier, Europe had collapsed in a storm of mechanized thunder, panzer divisions rolling like a tide of steel, cities surrendering faster than maps could be redrawn. To the German High Command, the continent seemed conquered. To the British, it felt as if civilization itself hung by a single thread of coastline. 85 years later, in 2025, historians gathered at Dover Castle beneath restored signal lamps to mark that moment of suspended breath. New archival film, colorized by the Imperial War Museums, flickered on massive outdoor screens. Veterans' grandchildren watched their faces appear in footage once confined to reels of dust. The commemoration carried a message of defiance. Britain had once stood alone, and the sky itself had become its fortress. The retreat at Dunkirk had been a miracle and a wound. Nearly 340,000 soldiers escaped across the Channel, but they left behind weapons, tanks, and a shattered alliance. In Berlin, Adolf Hitler believed the British would now beg for peace. The English, he told his generals, are a practical people. They will recognize the hopelessness of their position. Yet he misread them completely. Churchill, barely weeks into his premiership, responded with words that would echo across generations. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender." Those words, carried by radio waves and print, reached a public exhausted yet unbroken. Across the British Isles, mothers fitted blackout curtains, children practiced shelter drills, and mechanics worked through sleepless nights to ready hurricanes and Spitfires. The war was no longer a distant thunder. It was coming to their doorsteps and to their skies. In modern 2025 Britain, curators at the RAF Museum Hendon opened a new exhibit titled Voices of Defiance. Among its displays lay small, intimate relics, a ration book, a diary scrawled in pencil, a torn letter from a pilot whose aircraft was lost over the Channel. Each object carried a heartbeat from 1940, a whisper of the moment when the island nation prepared for its greatest trial. For Germany, the victory in France had been intoxicating. The Wehrmacht seemed unstoppable. The Blitzkrieg machine, perfected. Luftwaffe squadrons had carved the sky with ruthless precision, paving the way for Hitler's ground armies. Now the Führer turned his gaze westward. Operation Celian, the planned invasion of Britain, was drafted on crisp maps in the marble halls of the Reich Chancellery. But before any ship could touch English sand, the Royal Air Force had to be destroyed. Hitler would gamble that air power alone could bring Britain to its knees. The decision was more than strategic. It was psychological. The Luftwaffe was the symbol of the new Germany, the weapon that embodied Nazi speed and modernity. Its commander, Hermann Göring, strutted with confidence, declaring that no enemy could withstand his eagles. Yet beneath the bravado, cracks were already visible. Intelligence failures, overestimation of aircraft range, and an underappreciation of radar, a technology Britain had quietly mastered. As we step into this second chapter, imagine standing in a field outside Calais at dawn. July 1940. The sea glimmers silver under a rising sun. Mechanics in gray uniforms ready the Heinkel bombers, their engines coughing awake. Across the channel, radar towers hum faintly, scanning the morning air. Neither side knows that the coming weeks will define not only the war, but the future of air combat itself. In the sky's silence lies the question, can a nation truly be conquered from above? 85 years later, that question still echoes, in the whine of modern drones, in the ethics of remote warfare, and in the lessons retold through newly digitized archives released this very year. The Battle of Britain was more than a contest of machines. It was a contest of endurance, of faith, and of the invisible threads that tie a people to their freedom. Berlin, June 1940. Flags draped every government building, and brass bands thundered through the Brandenburg Gate as if history itself had been rewritten in triumph. Europe lay beneath the swastika. In cafes and cinemas, the public was told that Germany's destiny was complete, that Britain would soon recognize the inevitable and surrender. Newspapers printed caricatures of a trembling Churchill, while radio broadcasts boasted that the Luftwaffe will finish in weeks what the army has begun. Inside the Reich Chancellery, Hitler paced before a wall-sized map. Red pins showed conquered capitals: Warsaw, Oslo, Paris. Only the Channel stood between him and total dominance. His generals pressed for caution. His admirals warned that Britain's navy remained formidable. But Hitler, buoyed by victory, dismissed them. "We will strike the English in their own skies," he declared. "They will fall like wheat before the scythe." Recent 2025 research from the German Bundesarchive, digitizing previously sealed diaries of Luftwaffe operations officers, reveals how deeply this arrogance ran. One entry from June 28 reads, "The Führer believes the RAF exists only on paper. Göring assures him it will be swept aside in days." Historians now see these words as evidence of an institutional blindness, a faith not in data, but in destiny. Hermann Göring, the self-styled first air marshal of the Reich, embodied that hubris. His office glittered with medals and ivory models of aircraft. He had convinced Hitler that the Luftwaffe's tactical air fleets, honed in Spain and Poland, could annihilate any defense system. What he did not grasp was that Britain had transformed its own defense into a living network. Radar masts along the coast, linked by underground command rooms, formed the world's first digital nervous system. Germany, blinded by overconfidence, never fully understood it. In public speeches that summer, Göring mocked the notion that British technology could save them. "Their machines are toys," he sneered at a rally broadcast from Tempelhof Field. Yet by 2025, engineers studying recovered fragments from British radar stations at Bautzen and Ventnor confirm how revolutionary they were. Using cathode ray oscilloscopes and mathematical triangulation, they could detect incoming aircraft over 70 miles away. Primitive by modern standards, but decisive in 1940. The German people, meanwhile, basked in the glow of what seemed an unstoppable era. Propaganda reels in the UFA studios showed Luftwaffe pilots laughing beside gleaming Messerschmitts. Children built model bombers in classrooms. A nation intoxicated by victory could not imagine failure. And in that blindness lay the seed of disaster, modern. Historians draw striking parallels between that illusion and the 2025 resurgence of tech triumphalism in military. Rhetoric, the belief that advanced hardware guarantees victory. In a recent Royal United Services Institute report titled, "From Blitzkrieg to Cyberstrike," analysts warned that over-reliance on technology can still blind leaders to resilience and human spirit, the same mistake that doomed Hitler's gamble. Back in 1940, British intelligence read the German mood with growing clarity. Reports from MI6 operatives in neutral Sweden described Luftwaffe officers boasting that London would burn before August. These intercepted boasts reached Churchill's desk daily, hardening his resolve. He told his cabinet, "They think we are finished. Good. Let them think so, until the first of their bombers falls into the sea." Across the Channel, the men who would test that arrogance were preparing in silence. At airfields in Kent, Hampshire, and Yorkshire, squadrons drilled under the watchful eyes of Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding. Spitfires taxied in precise rhythm, their pilots' faces hidden behind leather and goggles. Many were barely 20. Mechanics joked to mask fear. WAFs plotted aircraft tracks on giant maps with grease pencils. Every heartbeat of that system would soon be tested. In 2025, new interviews with descendants of those pilots, recorded for the BBC History Extra podcast Children of the Sky, add a human warmth to the statistics. One granddaughter reads her grandfather's letter, "If they come, I will be waiting. Tell mother not to listen to the sirens." His plane, a Spitfire MKY, was lost on August 12, 1940. His words survive in digital archives, fragile, luminous evidence of courage that arrogance could never calculate. For Hitler, the next move was inevitable. On July 16th, he issued Directive No. 16, ordering preparations for Operation Celian, the invasion of Britain. Yet within the document's language was an admission of uncertainty. Air supremacy is the prerequisite of invasion. It was a line that would decide the war's course. Without command of the skies, the barges massing in French ports were nothing but targets. The illusion of invincibility began to crack almost immediately. Luftwaffe reconnaissance misidentified airfields, undercounted RAF squadrons, and underestimated production rates from factories at Castle Bromwich and Southampton. Germany assumed the RAF was down to its last few hundred fighters. In truth, new aircraft rolled off assembly lines daily. Later analysis of 2024 released British production records reveals how rapidly industry adapted under siege, proof that morale and logistics, not myths, sustain nations. Still, in those feverish weeks, Hitler's belief in fate outweighed fact. He postponed Celian repeatedly, insisting that Britain would soon sue for peace once bombed into submission. In his mountain retreat at Berchtesgaden, he told visiting diplomats that England's hour is struck. Yet even his interpreter noted unease behind the words. The Führer, who had conquered Europe, now stared across 20 miles of water that refused to yield. By August's first week, German squadrons massed along the French coast. Airfields buzzed with activity. Mechanics painted black crosses onto new aircraft. The order would soon come, Adlertag Eagle Day, the grand assault on Britain's air defenses. The illusion of invincibility was about to meet the reality of resistance. 85 years later, that illusion is studied not as a relic, but a warning. In war rooms filled with glowing screens rather than paper maps, modern commanders still confront the same question. How much of victory is technology, and how much is understanding the enemy's will? The Battle of Britain, reborn through 2025's digitized archives and exhibitions, reminds us that arrogance in the sky can be as fatal as gravity itself. The summer of 1940 was unlike any Britain had ever known. The sun rose over fields still scarred by retreat, yet the air carried a new kind of stillness, a waiting silence before the storm. The German war machine had swept across Europe in months. Now only the Channel separated Britain from the same fate. Yet what Hitler saw as an island cornered was, in truth, an island awakening. In London, Winston Churchill's voice thundered through radios crackling in cottages, pubs, and city flats. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Upon this battle depends the survival of Christian civilization. His words rolled across the airwaves not as speeches but as spells, binding fear into courage, despair into defiance. Housewives paused at kitchen sinks. Farmers leaned on their tools. Young pilots listening from air bases clenched their fists with quiet resolve. The war was coming to them, and none would run. 85 years later, in 2025, the Royal Air Force Museum in Hendon unveiled a new exhibition titled Voices of Defiance. It brought together never-before-seen letters, diaries, and film reels recovered from private collections. Visitors could step inside a recreated 1940 operations room, complete with the sound of ticking clocks, radio chatter, and the smell of machine oil. At its center stood a Spitfire's control column worn smooth by use. Each scratch whispered the same story. Defiance is not loud. It is steady. Churchill's defiance was not born from strength, but from necessity. Britain's army was rebuilding, its empire scattered, its allies fallen. Yet in the chaos, the nation found a strange unity. Across every class and region, citizens prepared in ways both practical and symbolic. Volunteers manned anti-aircraft guns in London parks. Children practiced air raid drills in playgrounds. In towns like Coventry and Southampton, factories that once built cars now forged fighter parts day and night. From these workshops came the sound of survival, the hammering of wings and rivets, the clatter of engines tested at dawn. Women joined the assembly lines, their hands greased and blistered, their laughter echoing through hangars. One of them, Alice Wren, would later write in her journal, "The planes we build fly out faster than we can count. Every bolt we tighten feels like a prayer." Her words, rediscovered and published by the Imperial War Museums in 2025, now feature in the museum's permanent collection. In the halls of power, Churchill's war cabinet wrestled with grim arithmetic. Intelligence briefings estimated that Germany possessed more than twice the number of combat aircraft. Britain's oil reserves were strained. Its cities were exposed. Yet Churchill refused to yield. He sent personal letters to President Roosevelt, appealing for aid. Across the Atlantic, the U.S. listened, divided between isolation and sympathy. In July 2025, the British Embassy in Washington hosted a special ceremony marking 85 years since those first transatlantic appeals. A reminder that even before Lend-Lease, solidarity was forged in words. For the men of Fighter Command, defiance took a different form. It was the cold patience of waiting on the airfield tarmac, listening for the scramble bell. It was the discipline of turning fear into focus, of trusting the unseen radar operators guiding them toward incoming threats. Their commander, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, rarely smiled. He understood that victory would come not through emotion, but through calculation, through the invisible geometry of his integrated defense system. Modern analysts in 2025 still study Dowding's methods as the foundation of networked warfare. His combination of radar, observer corps, and centralized command was decades ahead of its time, an analog for the AI-assisted coordination now used in drone defense systems. In a recent RAF white paper titled Chain Home Reimagined, military historians describe Dowding's 1940 framework as the birth of digital thinking. While Dowding worked in shadows, Churchill lit the nation with rhetoric. His speeches carried not promises of victory, but of endurance. "If the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years," he said, "men will still say this was their finest hour." Those words, echoed through 2025 commemorative broadcasts, still draw tears from descendants who listen to recordings of ancestors that never came home. Yet defiance was not confined to leaders or pilots. It lived in the everyday rhythm of a nation refusing to break. Londoners carried gas masks to work as if they were umbrellas. Musicians played through air raid alerts. Newspapers printed advice on how to stay calm under bombardment. A shopkeeper in Southwark hung a sign that read, "Open even during raids." In 2025, a BBC archival project digitized hundreds of home-recorded films from 1940, tiny fragments of ordinary courage. One clip, filmed by a railway worker, shows a family picnicking beside a Spitfire landing strip. Children waving as aircraft roar overhead. Another captures a milkman delivering bottles through a haze of smoke after a raid. These scenes now play across social media during anniversaries, reminding new generations that defiance often looks like simply continuing to live. While Britain braced itself, Hitler mistook silence for weakness. His intelligence officers reported low morale among civilians, misreading Britain's stoicism as surrender. In reality, that silence was the sound of a nation tightening its resolve. Every blackout curtain drawn, every factory shift extended, every child evacuated to the countryside was part of an unspoken contract. They would not yield the sky. By late July, the Luftwaffe intensified its probing attacks along the southern coast, targeting shipping convoys and radar stations. To the pilots of Fighter Command, these were rehearsals for something larger. They took off again and again, short bursts of fury followed by long hours of waiting. One of them, Pilot Officer Jeffrey Page, later recalled, "The waiting was worse than combat. You listened for the phone to ring, knowing the next sound could mean life or death." His memoir, reissued in 2025 with augmented reality overlays, lets visitors to the Battle of Britain bunker in Uxbridge experience the sounds of those operations rooms as they were. Heartbeat by heartbeat. Defiance was also isolation. Britain's colonies and dominions offered moral and material aid, but the island itself bore the strike alone. From Canada and New Zealand came volunteer pilots, eager and untested. Poles, Czechs, and Free French aviators arrived, driven by vengeance and hope. They formed a mosaic of courage that Churchill called the few, a phrase that would soon become legend. The RAF's defiance reached beyond numbers. It was spiritual. The airmen fought not for conquest but for survival, not for glory but for the right to wake to the same dawn. In 2025, an international symposium at Cambridge University marked the 85th anniversary of the Few speech. Among the attendees was a descendant of a Polish pilot from Squadron 303, who said simply, "They came here to defend skies that were not their own, and found freedom that belonged to everyone." Britain's defiance became the world's symbol of endurance. It taught that courage need not roar. It could whisper through static, echo through time, and carry forward through generations. Even now, when drones patrol the skies and satellites guard borders invisible in 1940, the same question lingers. What does it mean to stand alone and still not surrender? As the calendar turned to August 1940, the waiting ended. The Luftwaffe had gathered in strength. Across the channel, pilots were briefed for the operation that would crush the British air arm once and for all. The first great test of Hitler's gamble was about to begin. The first blows of the Battle of Britain did not fall on cities or airfields, but on the sea. The English Channel, narrow and restless, became the front line of a new kind of war. In July 1940, German bombers began hunting British convoys threading the coastline from Dover to Portland. To the Luftwaffe, these were practice runs before the real assault. To the sailors and pilots defending them, they were the beginning of hell. Fishermen along the Kent coast watched the first formations cross the horizon like black insects against the morning sky. Sunlight flashed off wings. Then came the whistle of bombs, the roar of cannon fire, and the thunder of explosions that sent plumes of water towering higher than church spires. The Battle of Britain had begun, not with invasion barges, but with the slow strangling of Britain's supply lines. To the German High Command, this was the Kennelkampf, the Channel Battle. The plan was simple: choke Britain's trade routes, lure the Royal Air Force into combat, and bleed it dry before the decisive blow. Hitler still hoped to avoid a costly invasion. Destroying the RAF first would force Britain to negotiate. In Berlin, Goering assured him the plan was working. "The British pilots are finished," he told reporters. "Our eagles rule the skies." But over the Channel, the truth was more complex. RAF Fighter Command scrambled daily to defend convoys codenamed Bread, Peewit, Booty, and Pilot. Each attack tested Dowding's defense network, forcing him to stretch his limited squadrons across hundreds of miles. The sea, glittering like glass in the sun, became a graveyard for planes and ships alike. One of the first major engagements came on July 10, 1940. A convoy of slow-moving cargo ships, escorted by destroyers, came under attack near Dover. Dozens of Stuka dive bombers screamed down almost vertically, their sirens shrieking through the salt air. From the cliffs above, villagers watched as Spitfires and Hurricanes tore into them, twisting and diving in duels that vanished into clouds. When the smoke cleared, several British ships were lost, but so were German bombers. The RAF had drawn blood. In 2025, maritime archaeologists working with the University of Portsmouth mapped one of those very wrecks, a merchant vessel known as SS Portsmouth Star, sunk during that July raid. Using sonar scans and remotely operated cameras, they discovered fragments of bomb casings still embedded in the deck. The findings, featured in the 2025 documentary The Sea Beneath the Battle, provided haunting proof of how the skies and sea intertwined in Britain's fight for survival. The summer grew hotter, the dogfights fiercer. Pilots began flying 3, sometimes 4 sorties a day. Fatigue gnawed at them more than fear. They landed, refueled, drank lukewarm tea, and went up again. The average life expectancy of a new pilot was measured in weeks. Yet even amid exhaustion, camaraderie thrived. Mechanics scrawled lucky charms on fuselages. Ground crews waved each aircraft off as if saying goodbye to friends they might never see again. Across the channel, German airmen wrote similar letters home. Many believed victory was imminent. But the tone of their diaries began to change. Newly declassified German correspondence, published in 2025 by the Bundesarchiv, reveals growing frustration among Luftwaffe crews. The English do not fall. Their planes rise again like wasps. It was the first sign that the Kanalkampf was draining morale on both sides. Dowding and his commanders studied each encounter obsessively. Radar reports, combat records, and observer notes filled his map tables. He began to see patterns in the chaos. The Luftwaffe's attacks followed predictable routes, and Britain's radar coverage, those strange skeletal towers the Germans dismissed, gave crucial minutes of warning. Every interception, every victory refined the system. The RAF was not just surviving, it was learning. In 2025, military historians liken this stage of the battle to a stress test, where Dowding's air defense organism, as some called it, evolved under pressure. A symposium held at the RAF College Cranwell this year, Adaptive Command in the Battle of Britain, showcased digital reconstructions of those radar plots, overlaid on modern data visualization tools. Analysts demonstrated how information traveled from coastal stations to fighter command headquarters in under 60 seconds, astonishing for the technology of the time. Still, Britain paid dearly for every lesson. Dozens of merchant ships went down. Ports burned. Coastal towns were scarred. Civilians saw the war come alive in ways they had never imagined. From Dover's white cliffs, people could watch the battles unfolding, a deadly ballet of smoke trails, explosions, and falling debris. A schoolteacher in Folkestone wrote in her diary, "We watched as planes spiraled into the sea. The children counted parachutes. We prayed, each one opened." That diary, long forgotten, resurfaced in a 2025 historical podcast called Letters from the Channel. In the south of England, local fishermen became reluctant heroes. They plucked downed pilots, British and German alike, from the water, often under fire. Many refused payment, saying simply, "They're boys, not enemies." In 2025, the descendants of those fishermen were honored at a memorial service in Brighton, attended by German and British air cadets together, a quiet gesture of reconciliation 8 decades in the making. By late July, the Kanalkampf was taking its toll. The Luftwaffe's losses climbed higher than Göring admitted. Pilots began to question why they were still attacking convoys instead of the airfields that sustained the RAF. Some commanders urged a change in strategy, warning that the British radar and response system were stronger than expected. Göring dismissed them. He remained obsessed with proving that the Luftwaffe could crush Britain alone, without the army or navy. His pride had become as much an enemy as the Spitfire. The RAF, though battered, held firm. The men of Fighter Command began to sense something few dared to say aloud, that they could win. The channel had become a proving ground, and every surviving pilot was now battle-hardened. The system worked. The radar, the communications, the courage. Britain had weathered the first wave. In August 2025, a massive outdoor light installation called Echoes over Dover projected archival footage of those channel battles across the cliffs themselves. Visitors stood where observers once watched dogfights, hearing the hum of recreated Merlin engines blended with real 1940 radio transmissions. The past and present blurred, reminding viewers that history's echoes are never silent. They live in the air above us still. By the end of July 1940, Hitler's patience wore thin. The Kanalkampf had failed to break the RAF or the British spirit. The sea remained unconquered. The Führer summoned Göring to Berchtesgaden and demanded results. "The English must be brought to their knees," he said. "Strike at their heart." With those words, the next phase of the battle began, the assault on Britain's airfields. The skies over southern England were about to erupt in a storm of fire and fate. Before Britain could face Hitler's full fury, it had to build something invisible, a shield made not of metal or walls, but of information. It was a network that stretched from the salt-stained radar towers on the coast to the dimly lit plotting rooms of Fighter Command headquarters. It would be the difference between survival and extinction. The system had a name, the Dowding System, after Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, the quiet, austere architect of Britain's air defense. While others argued about strategies and pride, Dowding thought in patterns and time. He saw the skies not as chaos, but as data, points moving on a grid. Every radar echo, every observer's report, every scrambled squadron became a part of an intricate web. In an age before computers, this was the world's first integrated air defense network. From a distance, the radar stations, code-named Chain Home, looked like skeletal giants. Their towers rose 350 feet into the air, strung with metal wires that caught the wind. Below, in huts filled with humming transmitters, operators sat at glowing screens, watching green blips crawl across them. Each blip was a formation of aircraft. Each could mean life or death. One of those operators, 18-year-old Joan Hughes, later recalled in her diary, "The screens trembled when the planes came in. We never saw their faces, but we could feel them in the static, the enemy and our own boys, racing toward each other." Hughes' journal, long hidden, resurfaced in 2024 and was featured in the Imperial War Museum's exhibit, Voices of the Chain Home. In the summer of 1940, the women of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, the WAFs, became the unseen hands of this defense. They received radar signals, logged bearings, relayed messages, and moved small colored blocks across massive maps in underground bunkers. The men above might have flown the planes, but it was the WAFs who orchestrated the dance. As one RAF pilot later said, "They were the mind behind our wings. At the heart of it all stood Bletchley Priory, Fighter Command's nerve center north of London. Inside its operations room, phones rang non-stop, and the clatter of typewriters mixed with clipped voices reading out reports. Plotters pushed markers across a giant table map of southern England. Each colored tag represented a squadron, a threat, or a target. On the balcony above, Dowding and his group commanders watched the flow of battle unfold in real time. In 2025, digital historians at King's College London reconstructed the entire Dowding system using declassified wartime files and artificial intelligence. Their interactive project, Air Command 1940 Rewired, allows viewers to simulate an entire day of the Battle of Britain using real radar data and pilot logs. The research revealed that the average time from first radar detection to a squadron's takeoff order was just 4 minutes, a stunning coordination achievement for its era. But the system was more than technology, and it was trust. Dowding's leadership style was unconventional. He rarely raised his voice, never sought the spotlight, and refused to gamble lives for glory. To some, that made him dull. To his pilots, it made him indispensable. They called him Stuffy, half in jest, but behind the nickname was deep respect. He didn't chase headlines. He chased efficiency. As August 1940 began, Dowding's network was tested to its limits. The Luftwaffe had shifted its focus from convoys to airfields, the nerve centers of Fighter Command. It was a brutal change in tactics. Now every airfield became a target. Grass runways were cratered by bombs. Hangars burned. Control towers collapsed. But thanks to the chain-home radar, the RAF could see the attacks coming. And that saved them again and again. Modern comparisons are striking. In April 2025, the Royal Air Force unveiled its next-generation Sentinel Web, a digital network linking radar, satellites, and AI-controlled drones. Defense analysts at the Farnborough Air Show noted that its design philosophy mirrors Dowding's 1940 vision: distributed awareness, rapid response, and minimal human delay. "It's Dowding's ghost in the code," one engineer said. The lessons of 1940 live on in the software of 2025. Back in that fateful summer, one of Dowding's closest allies was Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commanding No. 11 Group, responsible for defending southeast England, including London. Park's command post at Uxbridge became a cauldron of tension. He was calm, tireless, and fiercely loyal to his men. "If the fighters fall," he once said, "England falls with them." Park's group bore the brunt of the Luftwaffe's daily raids. Pilots scrambled from airfields at Biggin Hill, North Weald, and Hornchurch, often 3 or 4 times a day. The men joked that they spent more time in the cockpit than in bed. Between sorties, ground crews patched bullet holes, refueled planes, and hauled ammunition with blistered hands. Every minute saved on the ground meant a chance to live in the air. Among the unsung heroes were the mechanics, many of them teenagers, who worked through the night to keep Spitfires and Hurricanes flying. In 2025, a discovery at a former RAF dispersal site in Kent uncovered a series of maintenance logs scrawled with personal notes. Ship A repaired, T-cold. Pilot alive. Those fragile pages, now preserved at the Kent Battle of Britain Museum, speak louder than any medal. Across the Atlantic, the fight for Britain's skies began to stir American hearts. Though officially neutral, the United States followed the battle closely. In August 1940, President Roosevelt called Britain's struggle the front line in the defense of civilization. In 2024, the U.S. Air Force commemorated the 85th anniversary of the Battle of Britain with a ceremony at RAF Lakenheath, where American and British pilots flew side by side, a reminder that the alliance forged in fire still endures. For the pilots themselves, rest was rare. They slept in bunkers or under their aircraft, helmets beside them. When the scramble alarm sounded, they ran before they were even fully awake. One pilot, Sergeant Jeffrey Wellham, just 18, later recalled, "We didn't think of courage. We thought of getting home alive." His memoir, First Light, inspired countless modern airmen. In 2025, it was adapted into a new VR experience for museums, letting viewers sit in the cockpit of a Spitfire during a real recorded battle. Despite the chaos, there was a strange beauty in the skies. The silver glint of contrails, the roar of engines, the sunlight flickering through clouds, scenes both terrifying and magnificent. Artists of the time captured them in paintings that still hang in the Imperial War Museum today. But to those who lived it, there was no romance, only endurance. By mid-August, the RAF's shield had proven its worth. Every time the Germans changed tactics, the system adapted. When raids increased in size, the radar picked them up earlier. When squadrons grew exhausted, Dowding rotated them north to rest. It wasn't about heroics. It was about balance. His method saved Britain, not by brilliance, but by stability. In 2025, a special documentary series from the BBC titled Network of Survival re-examined the Dowding system using 3D modeling and declassified communications intercepts. The producers compared it to modern cybersecurity networks, both invisible, both constantly evolving, both protecting against unseen enemies. The program ended with the line, "The Battle of Britain was not won by chance, it was won by connection." As August gave way to September, Hitler grew impatient. The airfields were damaged but not destroyed. The RAF was bloodied but unbroken. Göring, humiliated by the lack of results, sought a new plan. one that would finally crush Britain's will. His next target would be the cities themselves. The Blitz was about to begin. It began with the wail of sirens. On the evening of September 7, 1940, just after 5 o'clock, the first bombs of the Blitz fell upon London. The day was warm and still. Families sat in parks, children played near the Thames, and the smell of supper drifted from open windows. Then came the hum, deep and growing, the sound of hundreds of engines rolling across the sky like thunder. The people of London looked up. At first, some thought it was one of the usual raids, a few planes, a few bombs, then silence. But this time, the horizon was filled with aircraft. Nearly 350 bombers, escorted by 600 fighters, stretched in formation so vast it seemed to darken the sun. The Luftwaffe had come for the heart of Britain. For weeks, Hitler's commanders had failed to crush the RAF's airfields. Now they turned to terror. The goal was simple: to break British morale, to burn their capital, and to force surrender through fear. Goering promised that within days, London will be ashes. At 5:30 p.m., the first bombs struck the East End, the docks at Woolwich, Silvertown, and the Isle of Dogs. Warehouses exploded in fireballs. The Thames turned black with smoke and oil. Flames reached so high that pilots later said they could see the glow from France. In the crowded streets below, chaos erupted. Firemen raced through falling debris. Nurses carried children to shelters. Air raid wardens shouted through megaphones, "Keep calm! Get below ground!" For the first time, ordinary civilians became frontline soldiers, not with guns, but with courage. By midnight, much of the East End was burning. Thousands were homeless. Hundreds lay dead. Yet the people did not flee. The next morning, when the smoke cleared, Londoners emerged from shelters, brushed the soot from their coats, and went to work as if nothing had happened. The defiance stunned the Germans. A Berlin radio broadcast called it madness. Churchill called it grace under fire. The Blitz had begun, 57 consecutive nights of bombing, the longest sustained aerial assault in history at that time. Each night became a test of endurance. Families huddled in the underground stations, the tube tunnels that doubled as bomb shelters. Entire communities formed underground cities. People brought blankets, radios, even pianos. Children fell asleep to the sound of engines overhead. Poets would later call it the music of defiance. In 2025, archaeologists excavating beneath Bethnal Green Station uncovered layers of graffiti, toys, and ration tins, relics of those nights. The findings were featured in the Channel 4 special Voices in the Tunnel, which used 3D scanning to recreate what the shelters looked and sounded like. One message, scratched into the wall by a child, simply read, "We will not die tonight." Above ground, the city was transformed. The skyline glowed red at night, a ghostly reflection of the flames. Firefighters, known as the heroes with hoses, battled infernos for hours, their silhouettes moving through the smoke like phantoms. Many worked until exhaustion, their uniforms soaked not just with water, but with sweat and tears. In one harrowing night, 2,500 fires raged simultaneously across London. Among them was 22-year-old auxiliary firewoman Peggy Wren. Her diary, published for the first time in 2025 by her granddaughter, became a bestseller titled Ashes and Courage. She wrote, "The fire hoses hissed like snakes. The heat blistered our faces. But when dawn came and the bells stopped, London still stood. And that was enough." December 29, 1940. The night historians call the Second Great Fire of London. More than 100,000 incendiary bombs rained down over the city. Flames devoured centuries-old streets, including St. Paul's Churchyard, Cheapside, and Holborn. The wind turned the firestorm into a living thing, leaping from roof to roof faster than any fire brigade could follow. At the center of it all stood St. Paul's Cathedral, domed, majestic, and defiant. As bombs fell around it, a volunteer fire watch unit climbed its roof, stamping out flames with sandbags and shovels. By morning, every building for miles was destroyed, except the cathedral, rising above the smoke like a miracle. The image of St. Paul's surviving amid the ruins became the symbol of Britain's endurance. In 2025, a new digital restoration of the original photograph, now enhanced using NASA's imaging AI, revealed details unseen for 80 years. The smoldering shells of offices, the outlines of the Thames bridges, and the tiny figures of firefighters silhouetted against the inferno. The photo was projected in London's 85th anniversary memorial, light over the ashes, reminding the world that hope can shine through destruction. Every morning after the raids, Londoners rebuilt. Bus drivers cleared rubble to reopen routes. Shopkeepers painted "open as usual" on shattered windows. The newspapers published on time, even if the presses were moved into basements. The spirit of routine became its own form of resistance. King George VI and Queen Elizabeth walked through bombed neighborhoods, speaking to survivors, refusing to leave the capital even when Buckingham Palace itself was hit. "I'm glad we've been bombed," the Queen said. "It makes me feel I can look the East End in the face." Churchill's speeches became the pulse of the city. His words, "We shall never surrender," echoed in shelters, pubs, and the BBC broadcasts that reached every home. But privately, even he feared how long the people could endure. The cost was terrible. By May 1941, over 40,000 civilians had been killed, millions displaced, and countless families broken. Yet Britain stood. The Blitz had failed to destroy morale, it had hardened it. In recent years, new technologies have breathed life into the memories of those nights. In 2025, the British Museum unveiled Project Lantern, a VR experience using AI-enhanced eyewitness recordings to let visitors walk through a recreated 1940 London street during a raid. The project uses real sounds, sirens, shattering glass, the thud of bombs, combined with voices of survivors, turning history into something you can feel, not just study. Meanwhile, urban planners in modern London still draw lessons from the Blitz. A 2025 study by the London Resilience Forum linked wartime shelter planning to modern disaster management, from cyber attacks to drone warfare. The conclusion was simple: courage and coordination save cities. By the spring of 1941, Hitler's attention shifted eastward. His armies prepared for Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The bombings of Britain slowed, then ceased. The Blitz was over, but its scars, physical and emotional, would last generations. For the RAF, the respite was a chance to rebuild and retaliate. Bomber Command began striking back: Hamburg, Berlin, Cologne. The hunter had become the hunted. For the first time, Britain had survived a direct assault from Nazi Germany. It was a victory not of conquest, but of endurance. In 2025, historians still debate the Blitz's true purpose. Was it a strategic mistake or an act of desperation? At a recent Royal Historical Society conference titled "Cities Under Fire," scholars argued that Hitler's shift from airfields to cities gave the RAF time to recover, effectively losing him the Battle of Britain. A single change in target may have changed the course of the entire war. For the people who lived through it, though, the meaning was simpler. It was about survival, faith, and stubbornness. As one elderly survivor said in a 2025 interview for BBC's Witness 85, "We didn't win with bombs or bullets. We won with hearts that refused to break." By the spring of 1941, the skies above Britain had grown quiet. The nightly bombings faded into memory, replaced by the distant thunder of war elsewhere. London was still scarred but alive. Smoke-blackened churches stood beside rows of ruins. The smell of brick dust and hope lingered in the air. Britain had endured the storm. Now came the calm and the turning of the tide. Inside the grand offices of the Reich Air Ministry, Hermann Göring paced in silence. The Battle of Britain, his promised triumph, had become a humiliation. His eagles had been beaten not by superior numbers, but by resilience and coordination. For the first time, Hitler's faith in him wavered. Reports from Luftwaffe field commanders painted a grim picture. Losses were unsustainable. Experienced pilots were gone, replaced by younger, less trained men. Aircraft maintenance lagged. Radar countermeasures failed. British morale, instead of breaking, had hardened like iron. In one captured Luftwaffe log, discovered and digitized in 2025 by the German Military Archive, a surviving pilot wrote simply, "We fly into death. England does not yield." The document, part of the exhibit, Voices from the Other Side, stunned historians with its candor. Even the enemy had come to respect the stubborn endurance of the British defense. By April 1941, Hitler's eyes turned east. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, promised vast land and resources. Britain, in his mind, could wait. It was a fateful miscalculation. While German forces marched toward Moscow, Britain rebuilt its air strength and forged new alliances that would eventually seal Germany's fate. The RAF of 1941 was no longer the fragile force of the previous summer. Out of the ashes of the Blitz, a stronger, faster, more experienced air service emerged. Pilots who survived the Battle of Britain became instructors, passing on their hard-won knowledge to a new generation of airmen. Factories across Britain worked day and night, producing thousands of new aircraft. The Spitfire MKV, introduced in early 1941, was faster, with improved armament and engine performance. The Hurricanes were upgraded, the radar stations repaired, and training programs streamlined. Dowding's defensive vision evolved into a new doctrine: controlled offense. One of the unsung heroes of this rebuilding effort was Lord Beaverbrook, the Minister of Aircraft Production. A fiery newspaper magnate turned war administrator, he drove the industry with relentless energy. He simplified designs, reduced bureaucracy, and inspired workers with slogans like "More planes, faster." Under his direction, aircraft output nearly doubled within months. In 2025, historians revisited Beaverbrook's impact in the Sky History documentary Factories of Freedom. Using newly unearthed ministry memos, they revealed that British assembly lines, including hidden factories under railway arches and in London underground tunnels, played a larger role in sustaining the RAF than previously believed. Meanwhile, across the ocean, a sleeping giant stirred. In March 1941, the United States passed the Lend-Lease Act, a lifeline that allowed Britain to receive aircraft, ships, and supplies on credit. It was a quiet revolution in foreign policy, the moment America stepped closer to the war. President Roosevelt called it the arsenal of democracy. Soon, crates marked "Made in USA" began arriving in Liverpool and Bristol, containing aircraft parts, radar equipment, and even canned food. American-built Curtiss P-40 Tomahawks joined RAF squadrons, flown by both British and volunteer American pilots. Among those early volunteers was Billy Fisk, a 29-year-old American sportsman and Olympic gold medalist. He became one of the first U.S. citizens to die in the Battle of Britain. His story, rediscovered in a 2025 Smithsonian feature titled "The First American in the Battle," highlighted the early bond between the two nations, a bond that would soon become unbreakable. By the end of 1941, that bond would be sealed by tragedy. On December 7th, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. America was at war. Hitler declared war on the United States days later, bringing the world into total conflict. For Britain, it was both relief and vindication. The fight for survival was now a shared struggle. With the Luftwaffe's focus shifted east, the RAF seized the initiative. Bomber Command, under Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, launched daring raids over occupied Europe. Their targets: industrial centers, docks, and military installations. Though controversial in later years, these early missions marked the beginning of Britain's long road from defense to retaliation. The men of Bomber Command faced terrible odds. Navigation was primitive. Night raids were perilous, yet they pressed on. In one 2025 interview from the Imperial War Museum's Oral History Project, Wings Over Europe, a 102-year-old veteran recalled, "We knew we couldn't match them in numbers, so we hit back in spirit. The raids carried symbolism as much as strategy. Each mission reminded the Germans that Britain was still in the fight. The hunter had become the hunted. The skies over Hamburg and Berlin echoed with the same sounds that had once tormented London. While the RAF rebuilt its strength, London began to heal. Rubble was cleared, homes repaired, and rationing became a part of daily life. Children were evacuated to the countryside, but some began returning as the raid subsided. Parks bloomed again. Churches reopened their doors. In the underground tunnels where thousands once hid, murals appeared, painted by returning Londoners. Many were rediscovered in 2024 by historians using UV imaging as part of the Underground Lives project. The art told silent stories. Silhouettes of bombers, hands clasped in prayer, hearts wrapped in barbed wire, hope written on stone. For the first time since 1939, people dared to dream of peace. Yet there was also weariness. Ration cards, separation, and loss weighed heavily. The war had changed them all. "We had no idea what victory meant," one survivor later said. "We only knew what not losing felt like." In March 2025, a remarkable discovery at the German Bundesarchiv shed new light on the final months of the Battle of Britain. Historians uncovered a cache of Luftwaffe mission tapes, audio recordings from flight crews that had been thought lost for decades. Among them was a conversation recorded during a September 1940 raid over London, in which a German pilot expressed disbelief at the sight below. "The city burns, and still they fight." The recordings, authenticated by forensic experts, were released in the documentary Echoes from the Cockpit and revealed a striking humanity on both sides: fear, doubt, and awe. They showed that even among the enemy, there was a recognition that something extraordinary had happened over Britain. It wasn't just a battle of planes, it was a battle of wills. The lessons of the Battle of Britain shaped modern warfare in ways that still echo today. Coordination, information sharing, rapid response, the pillars of doubting system, remain foundational to 21st century air defense. In 2025, the Royal Air Force hosted a global symposium titled The Digital Doubting Network, drawing parallels between radar in 1940 and artificial intelligence in modern defense systems. From Ukraine's early warning networks to NATO's integrated air command, the same principle applies. Whoever sees first survives. Yet beyond the technology, the real legacy is human. The pilots, the radar operators, the mechanics, the civilians, together, they created the world's first connected defense. Their courage proved that unity could be more powerful than any weapon. 85 years later, historians agree the Battle of Britain was not just a military victory, but a moral one. It proved that democracy, though fragile, could resist tyranny even when outnumbered and outgunned. The men and women who stood watch in those skies gave the world time for the Allies to rise, for America to join, and for freedom to fight back. In a 2025 memorial ceremony at Westminster Abbey, the names of 2,937 RAF pilots who fought in the Battle of Britain were read aloud by descendants. Among the audience sat veterans, scholars, and children, generations connected by the same story. The ceremony ended with Churchill's immortal words projected across the Abbey walls. "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few." As the lights dimmed, the sound of distant engines filled the air, not of war, but of remembrance. A single Spitfire flew over London, its shadow passing over the rebuilt skyline. Below, the crowd stood in silence, listening to the echo of history's wings. The night sky over Germany in 1942 glowed with a strange light, not from the moon, but from war itself. Flames rose from the industrial cities of the Reich, and the deep hum of British bombers echoed across Europe. For 2 long years, Britain had endured the storm. Now it was Britain's turn to strike back. The early months of 1942 marked a profound turning point in the war's rhythm. Britain was no longer on the defensive. With the Luftwaffe's attention fixed on the Eastern Front and the Americans entering the war, the Allies began to coordinate their resources on a global scale. The question was no longer if Germany could be beaten, but how. In London's war rooms, Prime Minister Winston Churchill demanded action. "We must carry the war to the enemy," he declared. The Royal Air Force answered that call with a bold new mission: strategic bombing. The goal was clear: to cripple German industry, break morale, and weaken the Nazi war machine from within. To lead this new offensive, Churchill turned to a man both respected and feared, Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris. Known to his crews as Bomber Harris, he was relentless, methodical, and utterly convinced that bombing could end the war. His vision was to make the skies above Germany a constant reminder of Britain's reach. Under Harris's leadership, Bomber Command transformed. New aircraft like the Avro Lancaster and the Handley Page Halifax entered service, massive four-engine bombers capable of carrying heavy payloads deep into enemy territory. With their arrival, the RAF's capabilities multiplied overnight. In one of the most iconic moments of 1942, more than 1,000 bombers took off in a single night during the 1,000-bomber raid on Cologne. The operation stunned Germany and electrified Britain. The city burned for days, and propaganda films celebrated the raid as proof that the tide had turned. But behind the triumph lay a harsher truth: the human cost. Bomber losses were catastrophic. Of the young men who took to the skies, nearly half would never return. In their quarters, airmen would leave letters on their bunks before every mission, knowing that one night might be their last. A 2025 BBC investigative series titled Wings in Shadow revisited those missions through newly declassified RAF records, revealing flight transcripts that captured the eerie calm of these crews before battle. One recording from a Lancaster crew read, "Tell Mum we flew high tonight. The stars were beautiful." The plane never came back. As bombs fell on Cologne, Essen, and Hamburg, Britain's own factories roared with new life. The shadow factories, hidden beneath railways and quarries and even under schools, produced aircraft at record speed. Women took over the production lines, becoming the unseen soldiers of Britain's industrial war. Rosie the Riveter was an American icon, but in Britain, millions of women worked similar miracles. At the Castle Bromwich Spitfire factory, workers operated under blackout conditions, their hands often raw from metal filings. Yet production soared. Every day, new machines rolled out, each one a symbol of defiance. In 2025, archaeologists unearthed one of these hidden production sites beneath the Midlands, perfectly preserved, with aircraft parts and workers' graffiti still intact. It became the centerpiece of the Imperial War Museum's exhibit, The Underground Arsenal. Messages scratched into the walls read, "For Dad," "Lost in France," and "We build what they fly." With the entry of the United States, the air war expanded beyond anything the world had ever seen. The U.S. Army Air Forces brought with them new machines, the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, capable of precision daylight bombing. By 1943, British night raids and American daytime missions combined into a continuous 24-hour assault on Nazi-controlled Europe. The partnership was far from seamless at first. British commanders favored area bombing, while the Americans aimed for specific industrial targets. But over time, coordination improved. The combined power of the RAF and USAF reshaped the war. Cities like Hamburg, Dresden, and Berlin would bear the brunt of this new strategy, a campaign that remains morally complex and deeply debated even 8 decades later. In July 1943, Operation Gomorrah, the bombing of Hamburg, marked a terrifying new chapter. British and American bombers dropped nearly 9,000 tons of explosives and incendiaries, igniting a firestorm that consumed the city. Winds of over 150 miles per hour tore through the streets, and entire districts were obliterated. Eyewitness accounts, both German and British, described the scene with haunting clarity. One survivor recalled, "The air itself was on fire." Another wrote, "It was as if the world had ended." For Britain, it was seen as retribution for the Blitz, a grim echo of London's own suffering. For historians, it was the beginning of a moral reckoning that continues to this day. In 2025, thermal scans from newly discovered aerial footage, taken by reconnaissance planes just hours after the raids, provided chilling detail. These images, analyzed in the documentary Inferno from the Sky, revealed the scale of the devastation with modern clarity, reigniting the debate about the ethics of strategic bombing. Behind the bombers and flames, another silent war was being fought, a war of information. At Bletchley Park, British codebreakers were intercepting and deciphering German communications at a pace that astonished military planners. Each decoded message guided bombers toward vital targets, U-boats, rail lines, and ammunition depots. Among those working in secrecy was a quiet mathematician named Alan Turing. His pioneering work with early computers not only shortened the war, but also laid the foundation for the digital world that followed. In 2025, the Alan Turing Institute released a reconstructed Enigma transcript, detailing how Bletchley's insights directly influenced bombing missions in 1943. It confirmed what many had long suspected. Intelligence, not firepower alone, was the key to Britain's success. As the bombing campaign intensified, voices of doubt began to emerge within Britain itself. Some church leaders and members of parliament questioned whether mass destruction of cities was justified. The philosopher C.E.M. Joad wrote, "We are destroying not only the enemy's war machine, but our own moral compass." Bomber Harris, however, remained unshaken. "The Nazis sowed the wind," he said. "Now they are reaping the whirlwind." This tension between vengeance and justice would become one of the defining moral questions of the modern age, explored in countless post-war films, novels, and academic debates. Yet for those who flew, the question was simpler: survival. In 2025, researchers uncovered a cache of undeveloped film reels hidden inside a bombed-out RAF airfield hangar in Lincolnshire. Once restored, they revealed rare color footage of bomber command crews, laughing, smoking, and preparing for flight. The faces were young, the atmosphere strangely calm. One frame captured a pilot writing in chalk on his Lancaster's fuselage, "To Cologne, with love, for Coventry." That single image went viral upon release, reminding the world of the war's cyclical cruelty. Historians titled the collection, "The Faces That Flew," a haunting testament to those who carried the war back across the Channel and to the heavy burden they bore. The Allied bombing campaign did not win the war by itself, but it shattered the illusion of German invincibility. It forced the Reich to divert vast resources to homeland defense and weakened its capacity to fight on multiple fronts. After the war, Bomber Harris was both celebrated and condemned. Statues of him were erected and defaced. The debate over the bombing's morality continues even in the 21st century. Yet beyond the politics, the human legacy endures. The courage of those young airmen, many no older than 20, remains one of the most enduring symbols of sacrifice. They flew through darkness so that others could live in light. In the words of one 2025 historian, Dr. Amelia Hargreaves, the bombing campaign was not a tale of heroes or villains. It was a reflection of humanity itself, capable of both brilliance and brutality, mercy and madness. The skies over Europe in 1943 were not just a battlefield. They were a mirror. Today, in airfields across Britain, the engines of surviving Lancasters still roar to life for commemorative flights. As they climb into the gray sky, their echoes carry a message from the past, one of remembrance, endurance, and warning. By late 1942, the smoke of London's burning skies had begun to clear, but the world was still on fire. Across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, the Empire was fighting for its very existence. The Battle of Britain had proven that Hitler could be stopped. Now came the harder question: could he and his allies be defeated everywhere? Far from the green fields of England, another war raged under a brutal sun. The North African desert, vast, silent, and deadly, became the new arena where the British Empire met the Axis head-on. It was here that tanks replaced Spitfires and sand replaced clouds. The armies of Britain, Italy, and Germany clashed across the dunes in battles that seemed as endless as the horizon itself. At first, things went badly. In 1941, British forces faced one of Germany's most brilliant commanders, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. His tactics were fast, fluid, and unpredictable. The Afrika Korps outmaneuvered the British again and again, forcing retreats across Libya and Egypt. But among the chaos rose a new British commander, a man as stubborn as the desert was harsh. His name was Bernard Law Montgomery. Monty, as his soldiers called him, rebuilt the 8th Army from the ground up. Discipline, morale, and coordination became his weapons. In October 1942, at the small Egyptian railway stop of El Alamein, Montgomery made his stand. "This is not the end," Churchill would later say, "but it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning." The Battle of El Alamein was one of the great turning points of the war. Over 1,000 British and Commonwealth guns opened fire in a thunderous bombardment. The desert lit up as if struck by lightning. After 12 days of fierce fighting, Rommel was forced to retreat. The tide had turned. In 2025, satellite ground-penetrating scans by the University of Alexandria uncovered long-buried remains of tank tracks, weapons, and even handwritten notes preserved in the dry sands. These artifacts, now displayed in the exhibit El Alamein Unearthed, provided new insight into the movements of both armies and the conditions soldiers faced. One recovered artifact was a water flask etched with the words, "To Mum, I'm still fighting." It belonged to Private James McAllister of the 9th Australian Division. His remains were identified through DNA testing in 2025, and his story reignited global interest in the human cost of desert warfare. While the desert battles raged, the Atlantic Ocean was another war zone, one that determined whether Britain would live or starve. German U-boats prowled the sea lanes, preying on Allied convoys that carried vital supplies of food, weapons, and oil. The men who sailed those routes lived under constant fear, listening for the ominous ping of sonar that meant death might be seconds away. The Battle of the Atlantic was fought not by aces or generals, but by merchant sailors and naval escorts, men whose courage went largely unsung. Their mission was simple but vital: keep Britain fed and armed. By 1943, new technology began to turn the tide. Long-range aircraft like the Liberator patrol bomber, improved sonar and radar-equipped escort ships helped hunt down the U-boats. The hunter became the hunted. In 2025, the wreckage of U-966, one of the last German submarines sunk in 1943, was finally mapped in stunning detail off the coast of Galicia, Spain. Using advanced deep-sea drones, maritime archaeologists revealed personal belongings of its crew: a pocket watch, a compass, and a waterlogged letter never delivered. The discovery, featured in the documentary Voices Beneath the Waves, brought new humanity to a long-forgotten chapter of the Sea War. After victory in North Africa, the Allies set their sights on Europe's soft underbelly. The invasion of Sicily in 1943, codenamed Operation Husky, marked the beginning of the push back into the continent. British and American troops stormed the beaches under heavy fire, supported by naval bombardments and paratroopers dropping behind enemy lines. Within weeks, Sicily fell and Mussolini's regime began to crumble. For the first time, the people of occupied Europe saw Allied soldiers return, not as conquerors, but as liberators. Yet the cost was immense. The rugged terrain of Italy would claim tens of thousands of lives over the next 2 years. Battles like Monte Cassino and Anzio turned mountains and monasteries into killing fields. In 2025, digital 3D mapping by Italian archaeologists reconstructed the ruins of Monte Cassino Abbey exactly as they stood before the bombing. The interactive exhibit, Ruins Rebuilt, allows modern visitors to walk virtually through the monastery and hear recordings of surviving monks who witnessed its destruction. While Europe burned, another corner of the British Empire faced an equally desperate struggle. In December 1941, Japan launched a surprise offensive across the Pacific, striking not only the United States at Pearl Harbor, but also British colonies in Asia. Singapore, once thought impregnable, fell in February 1942, one of the darkest moments in British military history. Tens of thousands of Allied soldiers became prisoners of war, many perishing on the brutal Burma Railway or in jungle camps. Yet even here, amid defeat, stories of resilience emerged. The Chindits, a special British Indian force led by Major General Ord Wingate, launched daring long-range raids deep into the Burmese jungles. Operating behind enemy lines, they lived off the land, cut supply routes, and harassed Japanese forces in some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. Modern historians call it one of the earliest examples of special operations warfare. In 2025, genetic researchers in India identified descendants of native Kachin guides who fought alongside the Chindits, helping map forgotten routes through the jungle. Their oral histories, preserved in the film Echoes of the Chindits, gave voice to those who fought in silence. World War II was not just Britain's war, it was the Empire's war. From Canada to Kenya, from India to New Zealand, millions served under the Union Jack. They fought in every theater, often far from home, in battles that few in Britain ever saw. In 2025, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission unveiled a new digital memorial project, Shared Sky, connecting graves and stories from 150 countries. Through augmented reality, visitors can trace the journeys of soldiers, from villages in Punjab to beaches in Normandy, from Cairo to the jungles of Burma. The project revealed the vast scale of global sacrifice. Over 2.5 million Indians served in the British forces during the war. Many never returned, but their descendants now share their stories online, ensuring that their bravery, once overlooked, is finally honored. While soldiers fought abroad, the war at home continued. Britain's cities, still scarred by the Blitz, became centers of production once more. The war effort mobilized everyone, from scientists and engineers to farmers and factory workers. In 2025, the British National Archives declassified a trove of documents showing how secret research facilities in Scotland and Wales contributed to radar advancements and early jet propulsion. These innovations would soon revolutionize not only the war, but the future of aviation itself. 80 years later, historians see World War II not just as a story of battle, but as a story of networks, human, industrial, and moral. In 2025, when nations again face global crises, the lesson of 1942-43 remains powerful. No victory comes from isolation. The Battle of Britain showed that information wins wars. El Alamein proved that discipline and strategy can overcome despair. And the global campaigns, from the jungles of Burma to the waves of the Atlantic, taught that the strength of an alliance lies in its diversity. By the end of 1943, the Empire had weathered its greatest storm. Britain stood bloodied but unbroken, now joined by vast armies from across the world. The flames of war still burned, but now they burned on Axis soil. The world map was changing, and though few knew it at the time, the empire that fought for survival would not emerge unchanged. Victory would come, but it would mark the beginning of a new age, one of decolonization, transformation, and the birth of a new global order. The year was 1944. After nearly 5 years of war, Britain and her allies stood at the threshold of Europe once more. From the deserts of Africa to the snows of Russia, the Axis had been pushed back, but not broken. Ahead lay Hitler's fortress Europe, defended by concrete, steel, and fanatical determination. The next step would decide the fate of the world. The invasion of Nazi-occupied France, codenamed Operation Overlord, was the most ambitious military operation in history. It required coordination across air, land, and sea on a scale no army had ever attempted. For months, Britain became a vast armed camp. Ports from Portsmouth to Plymouth filled with landing craft. Fields overflowed with tanks hidden under camouflage nets. Airfields hummed with the roar of bombers and gliders. Soldiers from Britain, America, Canada, Poland, France, and dozens of other nations trained together for one purpose: to break Hitler's wall. The man chosen to lead the operation was General Dwight D. Eisenhower, calm, decisive, and humble. His British counterpart, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, commanded the ground assault. Together, they formed a partnership of contrasts, American pragmatism and British precision. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The world held its breath. At dawn, the horizon off the coast of France burned with the light of war. Thousands of ships formed an armada stretching from horizon to horizon. Overhead, aircraft darkened the sky, while paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines in the dead of night. The beaches had names that would live forever: Utah, Omaha Gold, Juno, Sword. At Omaha Beach, American troops faced hell itself. German bunkers, artillery, and machine guns cut down men as they waded through the surf. The sea ran red, yet inch by inch they advanced. By nightfall, the beach was theirs. British and Canadian troops, too, fought with unmatched courage. At Gold Beach, the British 50th Division stormed ashore under heavy fire. At Juno, Canadians overcame fierce resistance to push inland toward Caen. At Sword Beach, British commandos linked up with paratroopers holding Pegasus Bridge, securing the crucial eastern flank. In 2025, a multinational archaeological team led by the University of Caen used underwater sonar and drone mapping to digitally reconstruct the Normandy beaches as they appeared that morning. Their interactive exhibit, The Longest Day 3D, allows viewers to explore the invasion from the perspective of the first wave. Each crater, each wreck, each lifeless shape beneath the tide preserved in haunting clarity. In early 2025, the Imperial War Museum unveiled a discovery that stunned historians: a set of forgotten wire recordings made aboard HMS Belfast during the D-Day bombardment. The tapes captured real-time voices of sailors firing at German defenses, orders shouted over explosions, the clatter of guns, and the trembling voice of a 19-year-old signalman saying, "They're going in," restored and broadcast for the first time in 80 years. These voices gave D-Day a human immediacy that even film could not. As Allied forces stormed the beaches, the French resistance rose in coordinated rebellion. For years they had lived in the shadows, sabotaging rail lines, ambushing convoys, and feeding intelligence to London. Now they stepped into the light. One of the heroes was a young courier named Lucy Aubrac, whose story inspired countless films. In 2025, French archives released newly declassified resistance communications decoded by Bletchley Park, showing how local sabotage delayed German reinforcements by critical hours, possibly saving thousands of Allied lives. The Battle of Normandy raged for 2 long months. Fields turned to graveyards, hedgerows to fortresses. Cities like Caen and Saint-Lô were reduced to rubble. Yet by late August, Paris was free. The world watched as General Charles de Gaulle marched triumphantly down the Champs-Élysées, declaring, "Paris! Paris outraged! Paris broken! Paris liberated!" From France, the Allies advanced eastward. In the north, British and Canadian forces liberated Belgium and the Netherlands. In the south, the Americans crossed the Rhine. The German war machine was collapsing, but not without fury. Hitler ordered the desperate Ardennes offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, his last gamble. In the frozen forests of Belgium, American and British troops faced brutal winter fighting. The 101st Airborne held the town of Bastogne against overwhelming odds. When asked to surrender, their reply was one word: nuts. In early 2025, satellite-based LiDAR imaging of the Ardennes revealed previously unknown bunker networks and supply trenches used during the battle, rewriting historians' understanding of how the German counterattack was organized. The findings, featured in the documentary The Last Winter, showed how close Hitler came, just miles, to splitting the Allied lines. By 1945, Allied air forces dominated the skies completely. The RAF and the USAAF launched round-the-clock raids on Germany's remaining industrial centers. Rail yards, oil refineries, and weapons plants were pounded relentlessly. The Luftwaffe, once so feared, was now shattered. In February 1945, Dresden, one of Europe's most beautiful cities, was reduced to ashes in a firestorm. The attack remains one of the war's most controversial events, raising questions about morality and necessity that still echo today. In 2025, forensic teams analyzing recovered remains from Dresden's ruins confirmed new evidence that the death toll had long been underestimated, not exaggerated. The revelation reignited the ethical debate, highlighting how even in victory, truth remains complex. By April 1945, Soviet forces closed in on Berlin from the east, while British and American armies advanced from the west. The Reich was collapsing under its own weight. Inside his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler faced reality at last. He raged, deluded, issuing orders to divisions that no longer existed. On April 30th, he took his own life. The war in Europe was over. On May 8, 1945, V-Day, the guns finally fell silent. In London, crowds flooded Trafalgar Square, cheering and weeping. In New York, Paris, Moscow, and small villages across the world, bells rang for peace. But the joy was tinged with sorrow. Millions were gone, and Europe lay in ruins. In 2025, AI audio restoration by the BBC revived original VE Day street recordings, capturing the blend of laughter, song, and sobs from ordinary citizens. When played through modern speakers, it feels like stepping into that jubilant, exhausted day. Even as Europe celebrated, the Pacific War raged on. Japan fought fiercely, defending islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa at immense cost. The Allies faced the prospect of invading Japan itself, an operation predicted to claim millions of lives. Then came a weapon unlike any other. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In moments, the world changed forever. Japan surrendered soon after. The Second World War was finally over. In 2025, newly declassified U.S. War Department documents confirmed how close the Allies were to deploying a third bomb before Japan's surrender. The revelation reignited discussions about the moral boundary of science and warfare, with historians emphasizing how technology had become both humanity's savior and its greatest threat. World War II claimed over 70 million lives. It redrew borders, reshaped nations, and birthed the modern world. In 2025, data visualization projects like the Human Ledger of War at Oxford University used AI to map every recorded civilian and military casualty, giving new faces and stories to the numbers that once seemed too vast to comprehend. Among them were the stories of those who never fired a shot: medics, nurses, resistance fighters, and civilians who endured occupation and hunger. Their courage was quieter, but no less vital. After the war, Britain was changed forever. The empire that had fought across continents began to dissolve, giving birth to new nations. Europe rebuilt itself from ashes, united not by conquest, but by cooperation. The seeds of today's world, the United Nations, the European Union, the technological revolution, all sprouted from the soil of 1945. As one 2025 historian put it, the war ended the age of empires and began the age of humanity's reckoning with itself. In the skies over Britain today, vintage Spitfires still fly. Over Normandy, veterans' families walk the beaches where their ancestors fell. And in classrooms, holographic lessons let students stand beside virtual soldiers, hearing real voices recorded 8 decades ago. In a way, the Battle of Britain never truly ended. It became part of the human story. A reminder that courage, unity, and hope can survive even the darkest nights. They fought not for glory, not for power, but for survival, for the right of free people to live in peace. And though the world has changed, their echoes remain. In the skies, in the cities rebuilt, in the lives we live today, this was their fight. This was the battle of the world. By 1944, the war had raged for nearly 5 years. Entire continents lay scarred. Empires had risen and crumbled. And yet, for millions across occupied Europe, liberation still seemed like a distant dream. But in the spring of that year, the tide finally turned. The Allies, now armed with experience, technology, and sheer determination, prepared to strike back. From the skies over Britain came the sound of a new kind of thunder. The engines of invasion. This was Operation Overlord, the gamble that would decide the future of the world. By early 1944, a massive Allied force had gathered in southern England. American, British, Canadian, and Free French troops filled ports and airfields. Their mission shrouded in secrecy. Commanded by General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Allies orchestrated the largest amphibious invasion in history. Over 156,000 soldiers were to land on 5 beaches in Normandy: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. In 2025, new digital reconstructions of original Overlord planning maps were made public, revealing meticulous details of each landing sector, and handwritten notes by planners debating weather, tides, and moonlight conditions. June 5, 1944. The invasion fleet stood ready, but storms swept the channel. The operation teetered on delay or disaster. Then a single meteorologist, Group Captain James Stagg, made a daring forecast, a brief 24-hour break in the weather. Eisenhower's decision was made with a single phrase: "Okay, let's go." In 2025, newly released British Met Office archives confirm Stagg's forecast accuracy down to the hour. Had the operation been delayed further, the next weather window would have come 2 weeks later, when tides and moonlight would have rendered the invasion impossible. At dawn, the horizon turned black with ships. Over 5,000 vessels crossed the channel. Allied paratroopers had already dropped behind enemy lines during the night, their missions chaotic but crucial. On the beaches, the landings were a nightmare of noise, fire, and confusion. At Omaha Beach, U.S. forces were pinned down by heavy German defenses. Waves of men fell before reaching the sand dunes. But through sheer will and relentless courage, the beachheads held. By nightfall, over 150,000 Allied soldiers were ashore. The liberation of Europe had begun. In 2025, a French research team uncovered a hidden vault beneath a farmhouse near Arromanches. Inside were film reels shot by local resistance members, showing the first Allied troops entering their village. Digitally restored and authenticated, the footage offers the most vivid civilian view of D-Day yet discovered. In one reel, a young woman named Elise Leclerc can be seen handing water to wounded paratroopers. Her diary, later found, describes the day the sea brought back the world. Even as soldiers stormed Normandy, the skies above France were a constant battlefield. RAF and U.S. bombers struck German supply lines, bridges, and cities. By now, the Allies had air supremacy, a triumph born from the sacrifice of those early Battle of Britain pilots. The Luftwaffe, once dominant, was now fragmented and weakened. Among the aircraft now dominating the skies were the P-51 Mustang and the Hawker Typhoon, fast, powerful, and deadly. They hunted trains, tanks, and convoys relentlessly. In 2025, flight data from preserved Mustang wrecks were analyzed using AI-based modeling, confirming that Allied air raids cut German supply efficiency by over 60% in northern France. By August 1944, the Allies reached Paris. The French resistance, long in hiding, rose in open revolt. After days of street battles, German forces surrendered. Parisians filled the boulevards as Allied tanks rolled in. One newly discovered 2025 audio recording, captured by a BBC correspondent, includes the voice of General Charles de Gaulle addressing the crowd at the Hôtel de Ville, words never before heard in public. In September 1944, the Allies attempted a bold strike into the Netherlands. Paratroopers aimed to capture key bridges and open a direct route into Germany. But the plan, Operation Market Garden, went terribly wrong. Weather, miscommunication, and stronger than expected German resistance led to disaster. Thousands were killed or captured at Arnhem. The war dragged on into winter. In December 1944, Hitler made one final gamble, launching a massive counterattack in the Ardennes forest. The Battle of the Bulge caught the Allies off guard. In freezing conditions, American and British troops fought to hold their lines. Towns like Bastogne became symbols of endurance. When German forces demanded surrender, the U.S. commander replied with a single word: nuts! By January 1945, the attack failed. The end was near. By spring 1945, Allied troops crossed into Germany. Cities lay in ruins. The once mighty Reich was collapsing. In April, Soviet forces stormed Berlin from the east. The city became an inferno. On April 30th, Adolf Hitler took his own life beneath the Reich Chancellery. 1 week later, Germany surrendered unconditionally. In 2025, new 3D scans of Berlin's underground bunkers revealed preserved artifacts, handwritten orders, ration tins, and fragments of burned maps. Forensic analysis provided new insights into Hitler's final days, including confirmation that cyanide and gunshot were used simultaneously. May 8, 1945. The war in Europe was over. Crowds flooded Trafalgar Square and Times Square. The bells of London rang again for the first time in years. For Britain, it was the end of one war, and the beginning of another, rebuilding, mourning, and remembering. Even as Europe celebrated, the war raged on in Asia and the Pacific. The United States advanced island by island toward Japan. Fierce battles at Iwo Jima and Okinawa revealed the cost of invasion. Then came the atomic age. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed. Japan surrendered days later. In 2025, new Japanese archives declassified diaries from Hiroshima doctors who documented the immediate aftermath. Their writings reveal both horror and compassion, reminding the world that even victory comes with unbearable cost. World War II left more than 75 million dead. Cities burned, families broken, and empires forever changed. Britain, though victorious, emerged exhausted. The empire began to unravel. Colonies sought independence. A new world order, undefined by the Cold War, rose from the ruins. Modern historians see the Battle of Britain as the pivot, the moment when humanity refused to surrender to tyranny. Without it, the invasion of 1944 might never have been possible. In 2025, the legacy lives on through digital archives, reconstructed battlefields, and preserved stories of those who served. For the young generations, this history is no longer distant. It's alive, accessible, and eternal. As night falls over Britain today, the skies are peaceful once more. But if you listen closely, beyond the hum of modern engines, you can almost hear the faint echo of Spitfires, the ghostly guardians of a world that was once on fire. They remind us that courage doesn't fade. It becomes history. Field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. These were not just words, but a call to arms for men from Britain, Poland, Canada, Czechoslovakia, and New Zealand who left their homelands to fight for freedom. Through diaries, letters, and personal recollections, we glimpse the fatigue, the fear, and the unity of these pilots who faced overwhelming odds with resolve and camaraderie. Each day brought aerial duels that tested skill, instinct, and courage, and every loss left an indelible mark on families and communities back home. Yet despite the exhaustion and relentless pressure, these men stood as one, embodying the spirit of resilience. In a modern context, surveys reveal a sobering truth. Nearly half of Britons under 40 cannot identify the Battle of Britain, highlighting the fragility of historical memory and the urgent need to keep their story alive through education, museums, and remembrance events. As the Battle of Britain raged overhead, a new terror descended upon Britain's cities. When the Luftwaffe shifted its focus from airfields and military targets to civilian centers, London, Coventry, and Birmingham bore the brunt of relentless bombing raids. The Blitz, as it would come to be known, tested the will of ordinary citizens, forcing them underground into shelters and temporary refuges, while fire brigades and volunteers combated devastation above. Yet, from the rubble emerged what came to be called the Blitz spirit, a quiet determination to endure, rebuild, and resist. People learned to navigate darkness, to protect their neighbors, and to carry on with daily life amidst chaos. Today, comparisons to modern civilian resilience, as seen in contemporary wartime reporting and emergency response scenarios, echo these historic lessons, reminding us that courage is often measured not only in battle, but in the steadfastness of everyday life in the face of fear. September 15, 1940, became a pivotal day, remembered as Battle of Britain Day, when the RAF's strategic victories began to shift the momentum. Pilots and commanders adapted their defensive patterns, using radar intelligence and tactical ingenuity to meet the Luftwaffe's relentless assaults. Gradually, the German offensive faltered, strained by logistical difficulties, dwindling morale, and the growing mastery of British air defenses. The skies that once seemed like a harrowing expanse of danger became a testament to resilience and precision. A battleground where human ingenuity and courage could prevail against seemingly insurmountable odds. Modern commemorations, including 85th anniversary flypasts and interviews with surviving veterans, allow us to witness the echoes of those victories and remind us how memory preserves lessons for new generations. Museums and historical societies bring the story alive, connecting the past with the present in ways both tangible and emotional. Victory, while celebrated, came at a staggering cost. Every triumph in the skies was shadowed by loss. Families grieving sons, brothers, and fathers, towns scarred by bombed airfields and destroyed infrastructure, and communities struggling to rebuild amidst the relentless aftermath. Even the leadership faced pressures, as Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, whose strategies had proven vital, was removed amidst political intrigue, illustrating that human sacrifice and bureaucracy often collide in complex ways. Today, modern military mental health awareness programs echo the struggles faced by wartime personnel, emphasizing that the cost of survival extends beyond the battlefield and into the quiet struggles of memory, grief, and psychological recovery. It is a stark reminder that freedom is never free, and that remembrance involves not only honor, but also understanding the full weight of sacrifice. Beyond the heroism of pilots, the Battle of Britain was won in unseen spaces and quiet rooms. Radar operators tirelessly monitored the skies. The Women's Auxiliary Air Force handled logistics and communications with unwavering diligence, and codebreakers at Bletchley Park worked in secrecy to decode enemy messages, shaping the outcomes of battles before they were ever fought. Spies and intercepts formed an invisible network, a filter room of intelligence that required moral courage as much as technical skill. Every decision carried consequences, and secrecy often demanded that heroes remain anonymous, their contributions hidden from public acclaim. In 2025, retrospectives and museum exhibitions have begun to reevaluate and highlight the critical roles women played during the war, illuminating the layers of courage, skill, and sacrifice that were long overshadowed in historical accounts. These unsung heroes remind us that wars are won not only with guns and planes, but with intellect, dedication, and quiet resolve. The Battle of Britain, like all great conflicts, became as much a story of memory and myth as of history itself. Wartime propaganda, post-war films, and cultural narratives shaped public perception, immortalizing the few, while often simplifying the complex realities of the air campaign. The 1969 film Battle of Britain cemented images of courage and drama, creating a cinematic legacy that continues to influence how the conflict is remembered. Yet history is rarely static, and memory evolves. In 2025, Ridley Scott's announcement of a new Battle of Britain film demonstrates how cinema continually reinterprets and reintroduces historical events, blending education with storytelling and reminding new generations that heroism, strategy, and sacrifice deserve both remembrance and reflection. These cultural artifacts serve as a bridge between past and present, keeping history alive and accessible in ways that textbooks alone cannot. As the world marks 85 years since those fateful summer skies, the legacy of courage, unity, and innovation remains alive. RAF airfields and museums host anniversary events, flypasts, and VR experiences that allow young people to glimpse what it was like to stand in the cockpits of Spitfires and Hurricanes. Modern RAF technology, including drone programs, echoes lessons learned from strategic thinking and adaptability during the Battle of Britain. Reflections on unity, sacrifice, and the human cost of freedom are central to these commemorations, linking history to modern education and inspiring a sense of duty and resilience. As we remember those who stood alone in the skies, we recognize that their courage shaped not just the outcome of a war, but the course of history itself. They stood alone, and in doing so, they saved the world. In interviews, museum exhibits, and interactive experiences, The story of the Battle of Britain continues to teach, to warn and to inspire, proving that the past, when honored thoughtfully, remains a guide for the future.